911, state your emergency?
No, yes, I'm still here.
What's your name?
Turpin. Okay, I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are they abuse us, and my two little sisters right now are chained up. There's 13 kids, and then a mother and father.
And how many of your siblings are tied up?
2 of my sisters, 1 of my brothers.
How are they tied up, with rope or with what?
With chains. They're chained up to their bed. I've never been out. I don't go out much, so I don't know anything about the streets or anything.
Do you think anybody in the house will need to go to the hospital?
I'm not sure. Sometimes we live in fields, and sometimes I wake up and I can't breathe because how dirty the house is.
When was the last time you had a bath?
I don't know, almost a year ago. But sometimes I feel so dirty. I wash my face and I wash my hair.
Does anybody at the house take any kind of medication?
Oh, I don't know what medication is.
Are you homeschooled?
No, we don't do school. Our mother tells people we're homeschooled. Our mother tells people we're private school. And she has a fake private school set up. But we don't really do school. I haven't finished first grade, and I'm 17. I don't know much about my mother. She doesn't like us. She doesn't spend time with us ever. Hi.
Is that the deputy?
Yes.
Go talk to him, okay?
As little girls and boys, we look up at the glowing angel that gave us life with love and adoration. But for too many, this is not a happy reality. For many, the woman holding us is a true monster. These are their nightmares. Delve deep as we unravel the turbulent bonds between mother and child. You are listening to Monsters and Mothers with your host, Betty Wild.
Hi again, this is Betty at Monsters and Mothers. Thank you for tuning in. Today's case is called The House of Horrors with Louise Turpin and her husband David. This is probably the only couple that you don't aspire to be. Louise gave birth to 10 girls and 3 boys, believing that it was God's way to keep having them if you can. Now this couple started out very young and in an unusual manner, where David should have been under arrest. They continued to date. David Turpin kidnapped his 10th grade sweetheart from high school and took her on a wild 1,000-mile cross-country road trip in a vain bid to elope, and they got all the way to Texas before they were finally caught and returned home. The mother of 13 malnourished children and young adults were held in filthy conditions, some chained to furniture. This house was known as the House of Horrors, and nobody would have even known what was going on. Then, her 17-year-old daughter escaped and called 911. The teen was so small that deputies initially thought she was 10 years old. The children's age ranged from 2 to 29, all believed to be the natural offspring of both Louise and David Turpin. Several children were shackled to their beds with chains and padlocks in dark and foul-smelling surroundings when deputies arrived. However, the parents were unable to immediately provide a logical reason why their children were restrained in that manner. Deputies located what they believed to be 12 children inside the house, but were shocked to discover that 7 of them were actually adults. The victims appeared to be malnourished and very dirty, surrounded by feces and filth. Sheriff's office said the victims were provided with food and beverages after they claimed to be starving. The father, David Turpin, is actually registered in the California School Directory as head of Sandcastle Day School, a private institution, but its address matches that of the Turpins' home in public records. The children reported that the school was actually fake, and they had never attended past the first grade. The school, which opened in March 2011, only had 6 students, 1 each in 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 12th grade, meaning for children's ages 10 through 18, according to the latest State Education Department data. The Turpins wound up filing for bankruptcy the same year the school was opened, stating in court documents that they had accrued between $100,000 to $500,000 in debt. It said David Turpin at the time worked as an engineer, earning $140,000 a year, while his wife was listed as a homemaker. Louise's younger sister, Teresa, and her brother, Billy Lambert, gave full details of the twisted life of the California couple who shocked America. Sadly, in her interview, Teresa tells us that her and her siblings were sexually molested and wondered if the impact was a contributing factor. They weren't allowed to talk about it, and the sister called it the original House of Horrors. The kids were sexually abused by their own grandfather, and their own mother allowed it. In fact, she would take the kids up to the grandfather and get paid to do it. These were devout Christians that went to church regularly. And this would eventually be the place she met David. The couples were charged with 75 counts, including torture and false imprisonment. David Turpin, who's 57, also faces charge of lewd acts with a minor. Both Billy and Teresa are adamant that neither their sister nor their husband should ever see life outside prison walls. I hope they torture my sister for the rest of her life. I have 4 siblings instead of 5, she said. She's off my family tree. She's dead to me. Teresa also said Louise had a marriage for decades that seemed so perfect, and it all began in 1984 when their mother Phyllis allowed 16-year-old Louise to date David, even though he was 8 years older. Their mother Phyllis was too scared to tell her preacher husband Wayne what was going on. He only found out when David tried to take Louise out of Princeton Senior High School, and they actually allowed him to sign her out. My mom allowed Louise to date David secretly because she loved him and he was from a Christian family, and she trusted Louise, but she was doing this behind her dad's back. He wasn't aware that they were dating. Then one day when David went into the high school and they let him sign out Louise, they ran away. David had his car and they drove, and they made it all the way to Texas before the police had stopped them. Cops made 16-year-old Louise call home. And what was crazy was after that, the mom and dad sort of switched roles. She says that her mom, who let them date, ended up being the one telling the police that they had to send her home. She wanted her home right now, but her dad said no, and she made her choice. She should go off and live her life. He was angry at the mother for letting them date. He was so upset that he told her it was all her fault. He got on the phone and told Louise, "This is the life you want. You're an adult. I love you and I'll always be your daddy, but now you can take care of yourself. If this is what you want, you go for it. So let it be, marry him and come back to Princeton and have an intimate church wedding, just the 2 families." And that's what they did. They went back to Texas to start their lives together. Teresa said, though, that her father's anger at his wife tore them up, and within 2 years, her parents had separated and divorced. Divorce followed, and her father gave up his evangelistic. Teresa said that the father's anger at his wife tore them up, and within 2 years, her parents had separated, divorced, given up his work with the church. He still went to church. He still lives for God, but he stopped preaching. I remember our family were all just crying. She said Louise's attempt to elopement and teenage wedding would not be the last time she broke her father's heart. On his retirement in 2012, he told his local paper of his dream to visit his daughter in California. He wanted to go by train to replicate a trip his father had made in the 1940s. My dad bragged on that trip the rest of his life. Getting to do the same thing would be pretty fun. But when he told Louise of his plan, she told him not to come, and that really hurt him bad. Phyllis, her mom, died in February of 2016. The father passed 3 months later. On her deathbed, both of them asked Louise to come to see them, and she wouldn't. She didn't show up to their funerals either. We told my mom she was coming, and then when we were at the hospital and me and my brother were getting ready to sign papers to take my mom off life support, and I called her back, and that's when she told me she wasn't going to be able to make it. She said that they had prayed about it, and that she had a bad dream, and she didn't feel that she could make the trip. And when my dad died, she said they couldn't bring all the kids, and she didn't want to make the trip because it was such a short notice. David's parents, however, managed to make it to both funerals. Louise's sister said, I thought she had the rich life when she married David, and he gave her everything she ever wanted. Fancy bags, all the clothes she wants, cars, trips, vacations. She had everything. The family even joked that Prince Charming had lived up to his end of the bargain. She had the big house, the cars, and she didn't have to work, and she had the expensive clothes and purses and anything she wanted, so we thought she was living the high life. I spoke to her about some financial problems I was having, and she said to me several times that is one thing she could never understand. She told me that I can listen to you vent, and I can let you vent, but I will never understand it because I never had any money problems. What the family back east didn't know was that the couple had lost their house to foreclosure and declared bankruptcy in 2011. Teresa stated that she had no idea that any of this was going on until they found those children shackled to their beds, malnourished, in the Paris home that they lived in. One child was 29 years old and weighed 82 pounds. And the 17-year-old who managed to call the police was mistaken for a 10-year-old. The children were starved, beaten, ignored. The torture continued in unusual ways. Louise, the mother, and her husband David had a huge wall filled with DVDs, but they would never let the children watch TV. They also would let the children see toys and bicycles, but never let them play with them. They would bake pies so that they could smell them, but they were never allowed to eat those pies. Do you remember that children's story, Hansel and Gretel? Well, Louise and David remind me of that. Why would you do that to your children? What evil has to lurk in you to do that? I can understand not having the money to feed them, but it continued. These children weren't allowed to bathe for a year, and they were only allowed to wash their hands up to their wrist. And a neighbor had reported seeing these children walking in circles for hours. And then when she spoke to one of the children, it seemed that they were scared and robotic. Can only wash my hands up to my wrist. Can only wash my hands up to my wrist. And they thought it was odd. What was odd is that they didn't even report that, the neighbor. The youngest child that they had was the only child that they ever fed and paid attention to. The sister said that Louise would send her pictures of the little girl, but not the rest of the brood. And last time I spoke to her on the phone was at Halloween, and she said that she was going to take the little girl trick-or-treating. She asked her sister why she didn't take all the kids, and her sister said that they were older and had no interest in it. The brother was the last to talk to Louise on the phone, and he recalls her saying that she was going to buy a bus and take the kids towards California and was actually thinking about having another child. Billy was shocked and said, "Why? Do you really want another child?" And Louise replied, "Yes. Yes, I do." So that was the case of House of Horrors. Now, there were a couple of things that I noticed during this case. There were so many people that had seen what was going on and had not reported it at all. The strange and unusual behavior, the way the kids spoke. These are certain things that if you feel in your gut, you really need to report. So if you suspect a child is being abused, but feel conflicted about whether or not you should tell someone, you may feel empowered to know that you have some options. You can make a report anonymously. You can also call your state's child abuse hotline and discuss the matter and get their opinion without disclosing who it is that you're actually talking about. And you should also check because you actually might be legally obligated to say something as well if you reside within the 16 states that say that you are a mandatory reporter. And what that means is that you are required by law to report any suspicion of child maltreatment. And if you don't, and it is discovered, that you are also guilty. Okay, so please remember that. These mothers that do this, they try to convince themselves that what they're doing is parenting and just disciplining their children just to correct a misbehavior. But that's not the case. And you and I both can tell when there is a woman or a father just acting out of character of a mom, whether it's in the grocery store, parking lot, or a friend of yours, you know? Sometimes you really need to report them, and you have to go against your feeling at like where this is my friend, I know this person, they wouldn't do that. Sometimes the people that we love snap and lose their shit, and you need to call them out on that, or you need to do something if you feel like they're going to attack you and not understand where you're coming from. But first and foremost, children are important. Okay, just think about what it would have been like if you had had somebody call someone when you needed help. Yes, it will be a temporary adjustment for a child, but think about it. They're going to be fine and happy compared to the outcome where a lot of these children went up dead. Thank you for listening to Monsters and Mothers.
Thank you for listening to Monsters and Mothers. Subscribe to hear more chilling accounts of mothers who commit unspeakable horrors.